Today I am joined by husband and wife Samuel Adler and Emily Freeman Brown. You may know Dr. Adler as an incredible internationally renowned composer, also a recently retired composition professor at Eastman and Juilliard. But he also has quite the personal story and history. He was born in 1928 to a Jewish family living in Nazi Germany. His father was a cantor and a composer, and they fled to America immediately after Kristallnacht. Dr. Emily Freeman Brown was the first woman to receive her doctorate of orchestral conducting at the Eastman School of Music. And she also conducts all over the world and has multiple recordings available on Naxos and Opus One. Their knowledge of musical history is quite astounding, and it was really inspiring to sit down with them and hear what they think are the parallels and lessons from the 1918 pandemic and how musicians responded in the 20s to what musicians can do today and how they stay hopeful even in these difficult times.
Hi,
Oh, there you are.
we got it on. Hi, Julia. I'm happily retired.
Oh my goodness.
I think after 68 years of teaching, that's enough. But
Yeah.
for a composer, the quarantine isn't so bad because actually it's dangerous for the music world because you write too much, you see.
He's
So,
been writing so much music, it's amazing.
Wow. Are you writing more than usual?
yeah, well, I'm home, no, not traveling. So we were supposed to be in Europe and in Israel, and we had to cancel both, of course. And now Emily has two concerts in Europe in January, and I
We're
have a
keeping
couple, and
and we're
so
keeping our fingers crossed
so
about that.
we
Yeah.
hope we can go.
How did you both come to experience or learn or discover your own connection to music and the power of music to be uplifting?
Oh, I think it's been for both of us, not to speak for Sam, of course, but I think for both of us, it's been part of our lives since infancy.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something for me, not for me, and I don't know, maybe you have a moment where you know something. I
Well,
mean,
I grew up in a house where my father played Beethoven sonatas and Mozart sonatas on the piano every day, and and wrote really. The more I know his music, the more spiritually uh, uplifting it is. And he was always optimistic, no matter what hit. And so early in my life, I went through this very optimistic musical period where he and I played. I played the violin. He played, we played all the Beethoven sonatas, all the Mozart sonatas, up to Bartok in those days. I can't think of anything more uplifting.
and in my position conducting an orchestra at a university, that's my primary job. I think the most important part of my job is to try and create a setting for opportunities for really meaningful musical experiences for my students to help propel them into a musical future.
Mm-hmm.
I feel as if I came from a similar background to Sam. There was a lot of music in my household, although I didn't have professional musicians as parents. But I think what we're trying to do is to create opportunities to expose as many people as possible to that part of music making that can be make your life so much richer.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting that you asked the question, and I've been thinking since you asked it about experiences. I've had wonderful experiences with children. I've written a lot of music for children. And um, about, I would say, a month ago, the conductor of the Young People's Chorus of New York asked me to write a canon. about our time.
Okay.
And 500 kids recorded it. And to hear these kids, it's a tremendous experience, you
Yeah.
know. And I've all my life I've written pieces for children, uh, and I'll never forget going to Toronto. I have 3 books for beginning pianists, and in each there are 20 exercises. And the first book is very little, 8 measure, you know, and but kids, you know, when they're 5 years old, they think it's great. They take a bow, they play
Yeah.
it, and take another bow. Well, I was in Toronto, and 60 little children, one played each of the 60 little pieces, and
Oh,
they felt like they were playing a Beethoven sonata, you know.
yeah.
They didn't feel that they're playing a little piece. This this is me. You know,
Yeah.
I'm playing this. That's a great experience. I
Yeah.
hope you have that someday. Because, you know, it's of course great to write pieces for orchestras and for string quartets and I've done that and I've had wonderful experiences. But to see something happen in children
Mm-hmm.
is
Yeah.
something that's very difficult to imagine.
It takes you back to being a kid yourself.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And to have had those experiences
Yeah.
as a child.
Yeah. Emily, are you teaching virtually or are you teaching in person?
Well, it's going to be a combination.
Okay.
I haven't figured out, and I don't think the technology exists to have conduct the orchestra virtually.
Well,
So
yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So this year we're actually starting up with strings alone, and we've been given very strict limits on the number of people we can have in a room at one time. So we're actually we can only have the string players because of the dangers, especially with flute players. The woodwind and brass players are going to be having all their rehearsals outside in open tents, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
I was on campus yesterday, and all these tents are up all over campus because I think we're not the only area that's going to be trying to teach some outside. So they
yeah.
put up all these tents without sides. So you
Okay.
just have the tent ceiling, and they're all over campus.
Wow.
Yeah, and but orchestra string players, we don't really like to play outside because you can't ever hear it. Our instruments are too quiet, so you can't really hear, and without a shell or something like that. So we're dividing the strings into two smaller string orchestras, and we'll be meeting simultaneously in 2 different rehearsal halls.
You know, even the major orchestras are looking for string orchestra things, meaning they want arrangements of things. I just was asked to do an arrangement of the Ives America variations
Oh.
string orchestra, which the National Symphony, we hope, will premiere on Labor Day.
Okay.
And you also did that. You picked up the Sousa marches that you had done.
Yeah, I did a Bagley March and the Sousa Stars and Stripes Forever for strings. And, you know, because all they have is string orchestras.
Right.
By the way, I did arrangement of Jupiter from the Planets.
Uh-huh.
You can hear it. It's beautifully recorded on YouTube.
Oh, great. I will look for that.
They play so well.
Great. It's by the classical New York classical players.
That must have been fun to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's fun to do because I mean, you can reduce things, not everything, but you know, I mean, Schoenberg and Webern both made a living by reducing a lot of the Johann Strauss pieces. You know, even the overture to Fledermaus.
Mm-hmm.
Smaller groups with piano because people wanted to play them.
Yeah.
It was during the 20s, it was very difficult to get orchestras and to get larger groups because of the inflation and the terrible economic conditions. Mm-hmm. And they actually made their living by doing those arrangements. There's an arrangement of Mahler Fourth Symphony.
With one string player on a part.
It's just
and then a reduced woodwind section. Okay. And so it has piano and harmonium. A lot of these arrangements made more than 50 years ago now.
In the 20s.
Yeah, in the 20s and 30s, used harmonium so as to add the kind of color. The effect, the color of brass ensemble to it. They're beautiful. We may play that.
So these arrangements are from the 20s, sort of in response to the economic or impending economic crisis, I guess.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because many orchestras, except for the very large cities, most orchestras, well, even in Vienna, there was only one orchestra instead of three, and everybody wanted to play. And of course, Mahler was the favorite in those days. And so somebody made an arrangement. I don't think they could make an arrangement of the seventh or the sixth or something, but they made an arrangement with, of course, the singer of the fourth.
Yeah, that one works.
And it's really beautiful.
It's a little more lightly orchestrated.
Yeah, I've also been thinking about scaling up some of my string quartets for string orchestra.
Well, if you want to, on YouTube, the same group does a premiere of a piece that I made from a string orchestra from string quartet to string orchestra. It's called Gdenk Fire. It was written for a gala in Frankfurt, raise money to refurbish a destroyed old Jewish cemetery. The Nazis desecrated it, and they wanted to raise money to, renew it and so on. And so they asked me to write this piece, and the New York classical players recorded it on YouTube.
So it was originally written for string quartet?
It's second movement by ninth string quartet, but I enlarged it. I mean, it's not the same piece, but most of it is that.
Did you add bass?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, that's something I was wondering about.
It's for string orchestra,
yeah. So you have to add a bass line to the string quartet.
No, I think
very important.
Yeah, and
you can't ignore the double bass.
No.
Extremely
it's
important.
Too big.
So have you found these? So these are live streams from the Berlin Philharmonic that you're watching?
Yes.
Yeah.
So have you? I mean, what is that experience like? Because I've watched some, and honestly, they make me kind of sad. They make me kind of.
I agree with you about that, but I mean, it's the next best thing, I guess.
These are so well done and so well recorded, and the video is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, they have the resources.
Yeah.
They do it from the hall.
Right.
It's in the Philharmonie, and it's really good.
Near us, the Detroit Symphony has been doing a lot of live streaming, but all videos of their concerts. They've been doing that for some time. I mean, I don't know where they got the funding to do that in Detroit, but I think it's a big asset for orchestras to be doing that. And they were doing it before COVID.
Right.
So now it's all in place for them, as it was for the Berlin Philharmonic, and I think they're taking advantage of it.
Yeah.
And they're hoping in Detroit to start the season in October. As a matter of fact, I hope they do, because on the first concert of the season, Leder Slatkin is doing a premiere of a new orchestra piece of mine.
Oh.
I'm hoping.
In our state, on Thursday, the governor said that the arts could open up, but they could only have a 15% capacity in their performance halls. Mm-hmm. And you can't fund an orchestra or a theater company or an opera company based on 15%. we also have this problem of very strict regulations about how long you can have a certain number of people in any given room.
Oh, okay.
So I'm lucky enough that from a logistical point of view, the two rooms that we'll be rehearsing in will be empty the hour before our rehearsals.
Oh my goodness.
Which
Okay.
So the air ventilation system will clean the air. And then we have a 2-hour time block during which we can only be in there for an hour.
Okay.
So it's really limiting. I mean, but these are things we have to do in order to keep ourselves as safe as possible.
Right.
And the students will adjust, and we'll all adjust, and we'll do as much as we can.
They have a system that's good enough so 2 or 3 people can play a trio and coordinate it.
Yeah.
And I mean, people are really quite creative these days.
Yeah. That has been nice to see, is how
Other
resilient.
musicians are going online and doing, Bach suites and things like that. And
the challenge, of course, is trying to figure out how to make a living out of it.
That's the bad part.
Yeah.
Right.
Very difficult. And I have to say that going back to school has been an unending series of video training sessions.
Yeah, I mean, how do you teach conducting virtually?
It's hard.
Tell them what you did.
Well, this year I'm going to be teaching conducting 101.
Okay.
So what I've done is I have taken public domain recordings of the excerpts that they're supposed to learn how to conduct all the basic techniques, and so that nobody in the class sings or plays or hums or anything, so that what I'm doing, I'm not finished yet, but what I've done is gotten an online metronome app, and I record 2 bars of click track from the metronome and then edit it together with the audio of the piece so that they know there are 2 bars, and then they give the preparatory beat. Normally in conducting class, the people in the class make up the ensemble that the other people conduct.
Yeah, that was one of the best part. Well, for me, because I was never taken by conducting, but I enjoyed pretending to be an orchestra.
Yeah. Well, so that's what you do, but now we can't play.
Right.
We can't do that. You can't have social distancing and have 2 people sit at a piano keyboard.
Right.
So I have all of these things online and I will play them.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody in the class will practice their conducting gestures. And I just decided, I know that's not what conducting is about. Conducting is about how you initiate music, how people respond to you. But I decided that for the first semester, they'll learn the techniques, they'll learn the gestures, and they can concentrate on that. And I will talk about, breathe when you prepare the beat, and all of this stuff. And then next semester, fingers crossed, they'll be able to do, they'll be able to learn what it's like to give a preparatory beat and get a response.
Right, because so much of it is learning when the class can follow you or not, and
right.
Yeah. Well, that's a very creative response.
Well, it's the only thing I could come up with, but
yeah. And so then, did you have to come up with this solution on your own, or have there been sort of communication among conductors and professors about what to do?
Well, there's definitely been a lot of communication. I've been working on this for some months, and I've been in touch with many of my colleagues. But this is what I came up with.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what Can you share with me kind of what it was like right at the beginning of the pandemic for both of you, and kind of how you adapted, and did it affect your creativity at all?
Oh,
Well, I can only answer in the negative. That
Yeah.
is, it has not really affected me personally because of several reasons. One, I don't do much traveling anymore. It has affected performances.
yeah.
That's a
Wow.
real problem because so many of my pieces were scheduled and had to be canceled. That has hit hard at the beginning of the pandemic. And then, of course, I feel that the lack of commitment to doing something about it nationally uh, makes me personally very sad and really worried. You
Yeah.
know, I mean that's lasting over and over again, and people warning people, and the whole idea of uh, wearing a mask is now a political statement. How stupid can you get?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we see it here. I
Yeah.
mean, now I would say that most stores, like grocery stores and so on, put out a sign saying you can't enter without a mask. Still, people do it and trying to make a statement about freedom. Well, of course, you have a freedom to die.
Right. Right.
That's what worries me. I mean,
Yeah.
personally, it doesn't affect me. It hasn't yet. I'm still well, and I hope to stay that way. But it's worrisome that other people get sick.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I would say has been the effect. It's that one has to worry uh, about one's neighbor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, otherwise, I've tried to keep working,
Yeah.
and I've enjoyed every minute of it. And I've written for people, and they've enjoyed it, so fine.
Yeah.
But anything beyond single or duos or something like
Right.
that
Very difficult.
Yeah.
is almost impossible.
Yeah. What about you, Emily? Was it did it affect your conducting
Oh,
process, your
quite a
creativity?
quite a bit. This spring semester, I was on leave.
Okay.
So, but after the 7th of March or whatever it was, everything was canceled.
Yeah.
So, I mean, everything changed, and I think that it's a very difficult time for artists and performers and creators of all kinds, and I I just hope for the best going forward. I'm trying as hard as I can to create experiences that will nurture the people in the orchestra in the most creative way possible and give them some hope for the future.
Yeah.
I think that's the most important thing.
You have to have some empathy. uh, in our country, we don't have a social network. I mean,
Yeah,
we don't have a social network that says, okay, if you get sick, we have somebody to help you. You don't have to pay your last nickel for it. And also, I mean, I worry that the major orchestras in this country have closed and nobody gets paid. I
Right.
mean, this is
that's
a terrible thing.
Right.
The New York Philharmonic just closes, and I think it's the same in LA and
Yeah.
Chicago and everywhere else. This is a very worrisome thing about our friends and neighbors.
yeah.
Right.
We just don't have the same social. I mean, for instance, if you go to Denmark, uh, if the orchestra closes, the state pays the
Health
orchestra
insurance.
musicians not only the health insurance,
Yeah.
but also salaries.
Right.
It's not. It's very different here. You're on your own.
Yeah.
It's nice to have freedom, but it's also nice to eat. And this, I
Yes.
think, is a problem.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And
I
there
mean,
isn't, yeah, go ahead.
so those of us who have either a salary or a pension or something like that,
We're the lucky ones.
we're the lucky ones. If and when, hopefully within, let's say, 6, 7 months, things will improve. I feel, of course, if we do have a vaccine and if we do have, some kind of medical ways of combating this pandemic, um, I think things are going to go back to some kind of normalcy, and perhaps the idea of listening to a string quartet now instead of an orchestra will be a kind of lifeline to entrepreneurial musicians who can form groups as they have been doing. I mean, so many. I mean, I, for instance, knew the people in the Jack Quartet when they were students at Eastman, and that kind. Also in the Kronos, you know. But these people are entrepreneurial and so on. And so are a lot of musicians that are now out of work and are thinking of what can I do when this is over.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I think the orchestras, like the big orchestras, LA, Chicago, and Cincinnati, Boston, and New York, they're going to go back. I mean,
They'll be okay eventually.
Right.
I think the smaller orchestras may be hurting.
Yeah.
I think the thing that we have to hang on to is that not just the belief, but the knowledge that music and all the arts are so vitally important to humanity that even though we are going through a desperately difficult time, that there is an ongoing need, and there may even be a greater need as we move through this period of time. And I think we just have to be as innovative and creative as we can now, and find the ways that we can find to make it through, but hold on to that belief and that knowledge of how important it is what we do.
Right.
And I think this is also true, very true of composers. I think in America, as in the whole world, we now have among the young composers, I'm not talking about pop music, I'm talking about serious music. We have composers such as yourself, young composers who have real talent and who are really creative. I worry a little bit about, using this time to write too much timely things, that are true today. You have to write an opera about what's happening today. That has never worked. And it works right now,
Right.
but for the long run, you write something that is universal and that is coming from the inside instead of from the outside in. And this, I think, is a very important thing to remember. I'm doing a series here with some of the cantors around called Music for This Time.
Okay.
We're doing the last one tomorrow. And it's not anything that was written for this period, but it sounds like music that gives us repose and some kind of hope for the future.
Right.
And this is what's important.
Yeah, I think that's such great advice. I mean, I had those initial impulses, right, when the pandemic started, that I needed to write something about what was going on right now. And in a way, I'm still somewhat doing that with one of my pieces, but I'm not going to share publicly that that's what it's about, because it's just going to be, this is my kind of emotional world.
Yeah.
in this time, but I'm not going to attach it formally to this time because it's supposed to live beyond that. And also, I just never like being told what I'm supposed to feel when I when I listen to a piece of music.
Right. Well, you know, you look at the past,
Yeah.
and Bach's time was one of the most difficult times ever. I mean, look at most of his children died of pneumonia and diseases which don't make any sense today anymore.
Right.
When he was when he was in his 50s, he lost two twin girls. They were 4 years old. They died of pneumonia. Well, he was smitten. I mean, he was devastated.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, the music he wrote speaks to us much more than if he had written about the death of his two little daughters about pneumonia. You know, he wrote something that is so spiritual for us.
Right.
And it's the same thing. You can go look at the 20s, such a terrifying period, or right after the Great Depression, what happened. When you look at American music was really born in the Depression. Copland came to America back from France in 1928, and the stock market crashed right next year. And during his early lifetime, he was almost starving. Mrs. Guggenheim gave him $1,000 a year so he could live under a roof. And you know, he wrote the most fantastic music, like the piano variations in those days. Well, they speak to us. You know, if he had written about how terrible it was that the banks went broke, who cares, you know? But you have to remember that especially the music that we're writing is much less definite about something than it is about eternity.
Yeah.
We hope.
Yeah, we try, yeah.
Well, we try not to write about today, because tomorrow is not today anymore. It doesn't last. You know?
Right.
I mean, look at all the works that were written about things of the period. Wellington's Victory was the most successful piece that Beethoven ever wrote. You know it? It's a crummy piece. And I'm glad that Beethoven wrote it. Because it makes me look at the greatest master. He also wrote a bad piece. So I can write lots of bad pieces.
Yes.
Well, the thing is, you know, he was not averse to making money. So when Napoleon was defeated by Wellington, he wrote not only Wellington's Victory, but he wrote variations on God Save the King and Britannia Rules the Waves. He made a fortune. So those are what I call occasional pieces.
Sure.
And to do that, you know.
Yeah.
But be careful of it.
Yeah. How do you think that relates when you're writing an opera about a specific topic or time period?
That's an interesting question.
Why not use Verdi as an example? During Verdi's time, because he was in a very political situation, he was also one of the most political composers, but not like Wagner. He was political in the following way. For instance, he saw the terrible things that were happening in Italy. It was not a country yet, but there was Garibaldi, and he was very much with that movement. So when he wrote an opera on the terrible government, he wrote it about the 14th century. You know, so when the censor said, well, you can't do that, because he said, what do you mean? That's history. That's not today. But, you know, it's the same thing that's happening today. but it happened also in the 14th century. So I write about the 14th century. You can't criticize it.
Yeah.
But it's still as valid in his time than it
Right.
was in the 14th century. That's
Right.
what I think. So therefore, the opera can be that. You
Right.
know.
Right.
It doesn't have to deal with the subject of today.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, John Adams's opera about Dr. Atomic, uh, it's it's pretty good, but the subject matter is going to be old hat in 100 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So is Klinghoffer,
Right.
which is much more political,
Right.
or Nixon in China.
Right.
No, I mean, the music is, I mean, I'm not criticizing it. I'm
Right.
talking about the subject matter.
Right. And so you hopefully continue to lean into the human element and the relationships
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
in that in those works.
Rather than events.
Right.
Because events change.
Right.
And people in 25 years, look, how do you feel about the epidemic of 1918? Well,
I wasn't there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, you can feel for the people maybe,
Right.
but
Right.
you certainly wouldn't write a piece about it because
Right.
we've got another epidemic now.
Right. Do you feel that people keep talking about this being unprecedented times? So as a man in his 90s, how do you feel about that statement?
Well, Julia, I've lived through a lot of unprecedented times.
Yes.
I was born in Germany at probably the worst murderous kind of thing that happened in many centuries.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, and the Second World War, which killed over 60 million people. So, this pandemic is terrible for us living through it. But once it's passed, we have to be creative enough to inspire people to see that it doesn't happen again. Just like we have to inspire people to be sure the Holocaust doesn't happen again.
Right.
Not always to talk about it, but to see that it doesn't happen again. And this whole racist business that we're going through today is very dangerous, just as that was.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you feel there is an analogy with what's happening with Black Americans today?
Different.
Different, yeah.
It's different. And I think the murder of a man in Minneapolis has stirred people to really react, and hopefully that will, in the next election, go to something.
Right.
I'm not sure it will yet,
Right.
but let's hope for it,
Well, and it's just, yeah, go ahead.
No, I think we have to always be hopeful that something that occurs like a pandemic or a murder will lead to something better.
Right.
Yeah.
For instance, will we be prepared? For instance, we had, under the last administration, Obama put in a pandemic unit of the CDC.
Right.
The present president took it away. Well, we weren't prepared because of it. Will we be prepared the next time?
Right. Yeah. So do you think there potentially could be a creative flourishing then during this time?
I think it's possible.
Yes.
I don't know about right now because I worry very much about people, just the lack of the safety net and the ability to survive.
Right.
So I hope you can't eat based on hope, but I hope that as we move through it, we get to a really rejuvenation of the creative arts.
I'm trying to be optimistic.
Yeah,
Let's put it that way.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's a struggle. I think we all know that.
Yeah. And we are still very much in the beginning of it, I think.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I mean,
too.
but it's up to us to fight it constantly. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we have an opportunity as creative artists to do something about it. Again, I don't mean to badger the problem, but rather to shine a light.
Yeah. So how do we as artists do that?
Create.
Just
Best,
making things.
write the best music
Create.
you can.
Yeah.
Real,
Believe in every note that you write.
uplifting.
Every note that you play. Every note that you play.
Right. Look, we're in a wonderful profession. Well, it's been such a joy to see you and to talk to you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you both so much for taking the time.
We're
Great
so
pleasure.
happy. Yeah, great pleasure. And we're very happy for everything that's happening for you. It's just great.
Thank you. And it's great to see your faces.
Great to see you too.
I will. Hearing Sam Adler say that he has lived through many unprecedented times really does give me hope and just reminds me that this period will pass. It's so hard right now and we are very much in the thick of it, but it was very comforting to think about what creativity and change may come from this period. I was also inspired by how Dr. Adler draws strength from his own knowledge of history and thinks about his musical heroes and how they were creative not because they were suffering, right? He's not glorifying them as suffering artists. He is recognizing that they also lived through extremely difficult periods and still managed to produce and create powerful work that lives with us today. While we can maybe look forward to a creative flourishing in response to this very difficult time, I think it's so important to remember what Emily said, which is that we really are still trying to survive and process and hold all of the uncertainty, and that this creative thriving that we hope will happen, we should not expect for it to happen right now, and that it is going to take time. I think that was a really important perspective that she shared. So thank you to both Sam and Emily for being with me today, and thank you for listening.